thanks everybody for being here tonight, and I'm really looking forward to this fascinating conversation between these two environmental organizations. Let me introduce myself. I'm Alejandro Lasso. I'm a climate reporter, so I cover climate policy for Cal Matters. We're a nonprofit newsroom based here in California. And I'm just going to be kind of helping the discussion out, really, between these two gentlemen here on stage with me. Let me introduce them to you. Jesse Patterson is Chief Strategy Officer at Keep Tahoe Blue. You've got some fans. So Jesse is a marine biologist who previously worked with research teams at UC Santa Barbara designing marine protected areas. He spent more than a decade helping lead the organization's science-based environmental programs and campaigns to protect Lake Tahoe. So looking forward to the conversation, Jesse. It's going to be great. And joining me on stage, is Fernando Nanocos, the Executive Director and Co-founder of Chile Lagos Limpios, or Chile Clean Lakes. Nano previously worked in finance and strategy with organizations such as Citibank and Fundación Chile, before helping launch Chile Lagos Limpios in 2018 to protect freshwater lakes in Northern Patagonia. So looking forward to the discussion. And Nano, let's start with you. I mean, I think, get the mic. I think, let's start at the beginning, kind of with the origin story of why we're here and the relationship that exists between these two nonprofits. Tell me about this story. How did the Tahoe model end up inspiring the creation of Chile Lagos Limpios? Just give us a little brief introduction to that.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Well, I was born and I live currently in Valdivia, which is a city that's in the middle of the lakes region of Chile. There's a beautiful lake district in the northern Patagonia. And the story behind this is that my partner and good friend Angela, she studied in Berkeley her master's in landscape architecture and environmental planning back in 2010, 2011. And she did a work comparing Lake Tahoe with Lake Yanquihue, which is Chile's second largest lake, with a planning perspective. Time passed, she was back in Chile, and we were working together in this master plan for a big development in one of the lakes, Lake Panguipulli. At a time where these lakes were starting to face environmental and social threats and problems. And specifically in Yanquihue, we were having conflicts between the municipality and the sewage company, between homeowners and the new large-scale development project. So we had the idea of why don't we go back to Tahoe and see this, international example of protection and conservation. So we tried to convince some of the homeowners, the local nonprofit, and the mayor to come to Tahoe with us. Of course, they said no. We don't think that's interesting. So we came anyway, and we had a series of workshops with Jesse and the League, with UC Davis and TRPA, to kind of understand this model and what was this thing that they had done here, and they had the clearest water in the world and a thriving economy. So after doing those workshops, we said, why don't we bring these guys to Chile and let's do a seminar in Panguipulli, to show this example and tell everyone that there's light at the end of the tunnel. So that's how it all started. We did the seminar. We had a great amount of people coming, and we realized that we had an opportunity to do something important in Chile, to create a nonprofit and address these issues that are very relevant.
And Jesse, when you went down to Chile, to Patagonia for the first time to do this work, was there a moment when you realized that this region seemed to be on the same trajectory as Lake Tahoe was decades ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. If you heard Nano's story, does it sound familiar to Lake Tahoe, but just 50 years later? I think what inspired me, number one, is what if we could do Tahoe again? Do it faster, do it better with technology, with what we know now, our perspective. And I think that wasn't only beneficial to Lake Tahoe, to Chile, but to many places in the world facing the same thing. And this was leading, climate change was very much a factor. and all of these things were happening. And so it was an opportunity. And, to your question specifically, many people have come to Lake Tahoe. I've been there 13 years, fortunate enough to work on protecting Lake Tahoe. Many people come and ask, how'd you do it? And, well, a lot of fighting, a lot of time, and a lot of money. And that's not what people have. That's not what we have in the world. And when people come to ask us questions about Lake Tahoe, we send emails, we exchange, we do tours. We often don't hear from them again. I think it's perhaps insurmountable. We've spent almost $3 billion on restoring Lake Tahoe. I don't think most places have $3 billion. And I think it's overwhelming. And so what was different is that Nano and his cohorts, they kept asking questions. They kept coming back. They engaged the US Embassy down in Chile to fund a trip of experts from Tahoe to come down and talk about it. I didn't know if there'd be 10 people there or 50 people. There were close to 300 people, including senators, First Nation people. The interest was real. And we realized we have an opportunity here to do this again, do this better. And that kind of kickstarted my excitement, my energy. Not only that, but I kind of like Nano, so we get along, which is helpful. Getting along with people is helpful, and relationships are helpful. And I would say probably that the strongest thing we have at Tahoe that's made progress is relationship building across sectors, across different viewpoints, across whatever it may be. And honestly, not to get too out of bounds on your question, but the world's getting more divisive and insular in certain ways, and that's not going to solve many problems. And Lake Tahoe and Chile and other places could probably benefit from it. You here today, can help us solve these problems. So that inspired me, and here we are today.
Yeah, and one thing that you're trying to accomplish is to do what you've done in Lake Tahoe, but do it very quickly, right? So maybe both of you could speak to this theme of trying to develop a model of sustainability, but do it much faster than the decades and the billions of dollars that it took to accomplish what is still a struggle in Lake Tahoe, but what was accomplished in Lake Tahoe.
I'll go first. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the work that we did initially with our Tahoe team was to put together a work program and refine what they've been doing in Tahoe and adapt it to the Chilean reality. So there are three fundamental pillars: science and data, cultural transformation and advocacy, and public policy. So we agreed on that style of work, and we worked from there. So we initiated a very top-class science and monitoring and modeling program of Chile's second largest lake. We raised private money, private funding to develop this in a year. We've done like 12 seminars to date, educational campaigns. We built a roadmap for that same lake. And those two work areas eventually were gonna translate into policy. But we haven't waited for the government. We're doing this from private efforts with community, with companies, with First Nations, because we know that politics runs at a different speed and pace. And like you said, we don't have time to do this at that pace. So I think that's one of the things that we learned from you, that we need to move fast, and moving fast, it's easier to do it through the private efforts.
And why is it important to do this if fast, Jesse? What do you see as a benefit?
There's a handful of things to answer that question, but the outdoors have shaped me. I think a lot of people, especially around COVID, were exposed to the outdoors and the benefit of that, and that's something for everybody. Public lands are one way to do it. I think private interjection is a way to give people an experience they're more comfortable with and a way to really experience it. And if you're truly connected to a place, you're going to be a good steward of that place. And so is that concept of how do we do that? Are governments the way to do it? Are the private sector the way to do it? How do we do it faster and better? People are interested. We really saw a shift over kind of 2019 to 2022 with people getting in the outdoors that weren't maybe educated or informed on how to do that properly. I don't think we had the structures in place. And so it was very interesting to be able to think about that again. Chile Lagos Limpios had formed in 2019, I believe, at the start, and so we started getting going. We started to see different ways to share that experience in a meaningful way. And one thing you mentioned that I think we're bringing back to Tahoe is, number one, technology. We can get information so much quicker. we can establish a baseline of our understanding of the lake, its health, our impact on the lake, and that's important. We can also find partners that are perhaps uncommon partners, like the private sector, which we can talk about. This idea that private companies have a lot of access, a lot of resources, and a lot of way to touch people that maybe have never been in the outdoors. And that's something, in my experience doing environmental work for 30 years, there's always a little bit of arm's length to a corporation or to someone like, are we greenwashing this? Are we in the pockets of the developers? Is that a bad thing? And I've learned in Chile, there are ways to do this and actually learn from each other. We're all kind of on the same path. And that was something I saw that was really, really valuable.
Yeah, and I think I should have done this at the start, but these two regions, the Lake Tahoe region, Sierra Nevada, and the Patagonia, with these pristine lakes, they're distinct, but there's a lot of similarities, right? And that's kind of what helped inspire this collaboration. Maybe you could talk a bit, either one of you, a bit about, the geographic similarities and how exactly you can learn from each other.
Well, yeah, I mean, California and Chile have very similar climates, and if you've been to Chile, to the south of Chile, you'll see the similarities in the landscape. This district of lakes it's similar in landscape and fresh water and the source of that fresh water, but it's different in terms of the dynamics and the stakeholders that coexist in that area. So in Lake Tahoe, you have mostly, your economy is based in tourism, services, and there's no extraction, there's no agriculture. And in Chile, we do have those two things. So there's a kind of difference there. Climate change is affecting us in the same way. And that's one of the things that we've been trying to work together with. Chile's pristine lakes are a natural lab for climate change analysis and climate change adaptation. That is very valuable because we can see how climate change is affecting these natural ecosystems, and learning from that can be applied to other areas like, for example, Lake Tahoe. So I would say similar climates, similar landscapes, and different type of ecosystem in terms of economic and social dynamics, but lots of things that we can learn from each other.
One more time on the question to make sure I answer it directly.
Oh yeah, of course. I just wanted us to step back and maybe describe the regions a little bit. I think people are familiar with Lake Tahoe, but talk a little bit about the similarities environmentally between them, and how that inspired this partnership.
Great question. It's basically if you step back in time. California 50, 60 years ago, what happened to Lake Tahoe is people discovered it. 1960 Olympics were there, color TV came out at the same time. Everybody sort of saw this place and said, I want to do that. I said, I wasn't alive then, but I think my parents said, I want to do that, and then they instilled that in myself. And when I went to Chile, I very much saw it. There were a lot of folks that saw the benefit of getting to a beautiful place, resetting, restoring, maybe having a second home there, maybe visiting there regularly. But how do you do it? How do you develop it? How do you get there? How do you prepare for people to come? And in Lake Tahoe, especially our organization, it's never been about the difference between protecting the environment and economic development or bringing people in. It's been, how do you do both? The best way to protect a place from people is to not let them go there. But that's not what Lake Tahoe is about. Lake Tahoe is about, come on in. This is what it's about. We want you to visit this place. We want you to appreciate it, and we want you to think about your actions when you're here. And something that was appealing to me coming to Tahoe was thinking about the fact that we have 4 times the amount of visitors per year as a national park like the Grand Canyon. But we're not a national park. You can go skiing, you can go boating, you can have a house. I'm raising my kids there. These are all amazing things that we should be able to do. And that's what they're doing in Chile. They want to come to the lakes. They want to move out of the city. They want to have a different lifestyle. How do you do it? And we haven't quite figured it out in Tahoe yet. We're actually figuring it out and working backwards sometimes and working forward, and it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Chile has an opportunity to take only steps forward, learning from us, using technology, using a different perspective on environmentalism. You have projects coming in that are not destroying the environment, but maybe aren't the best they could be. Can we use technology, science, our experiences at Tahoe to move those projects forward, to think holistically? to think about watershed-based development. So Tahoe was one of the first places that thought about a watershed-based development model, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency. Not California, Nevada, 4 counties, 2 cities, 80 agencies, which still exist in Tahoe. So my job is mostly meetings. But if you think about it, like that's not a great way to protect a place. Chile can think about it now. How do we get people here in the right way? How do we build developments? How do we think about protecting the lake? And I think you said this to me and I really stuck with me. Development with the lake in the center of our thoughts. So let's develop this place, but the lake is the reason we're here. I don't think we did that in Tahoe until several decades after we started protecting it, after our organization was developed. We also have technology, social media, and like I said, a different social perspective. So we're learning about how to do this better. I can bring these lessons back, and this is something that really inspires me every time I go down there. There's a real chance here.
And Nana, are there particular lakes or areas where development pressure is already really intense, and how do people confront that?
Yeah, this district of 23 lakes, I would say there's one that is overdeveloped and was declared saturated actually some years ago because of phosphorus and nitrogen levels. It's Lake Villarrica, probably some of you know it. And the other lake that it's facing, environmental conflicts and challenges is Lake Yanquihue. This is our second largest lake in Chile. It's a lake that it's beautiful. It's very similar to Tahoe in terms of watershed size and water volume. But again, it's got a different, economic dynamic. You've got agriculture, you've got aquaculture, renewable energy, tourism, real estate development. So it makes it much more complex, but at the same time, much more interesting on how to develop a pilot case with that dynamic that later on can be replicated in other watersheds in Chile and in the world. So what did we do to be able to address those multiple different views? It's a project that we developed with the help of the US Embassy, and we built a roadmap for this lake. So we brought together 23 different organizations, universities, government agencies, industrial associations, community organizations, and we put together a vision, which was what Jesse was saying. How can we have the lake in the center of decision making? Promote development, we want employment, we want investment, but having the lake's health in the center of decision making. And that's a great project that I'm very proud of because it has a vision, objectives, goals, and a set of projects that's going to drive this development idea for the future 30 years in this, iconic watershed.
And how do you, how do you protect water quality while still allowing for economic development? And that's something, I think that both of you can speak to. Perhaps first in Chile and then in California.
Yeah, I think, and one of the difference is that we have, I'm going to put it, environmental culture that was developed in the last 20 years. We had the lack of having the Tompkins people, Doug and Chris Tompkins. They moved to Chile 20-something years ago. They brought in this conservation model and buying big pieces of land and preserving them and rewilding them. And that really set a culture of environmentalism in Chile. And that was a dramatic change because it's a topic that wasn't being discussed before. So that's in our base of existence in Chile. Where was I going?
The question really was just, how do you make sure that, the environmental quality of the water remains pristine while also encouraging development, while also, kind of confronting the realities of, these lakes are used for economic purposes as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where like data and science and, robust science is very important. Because no one can argue when you have real data and you modeled it and you have conclusions. It's difficult to, or it can be challenged, but it's something that you can put in front of all different organizations, like communities, indigenous groups, extractive companies, and say this is the baseline. This is the data we have with this lake. Yeah. This is what we know of this complex natural ecosystem, and this is that we know how it could be threatened and affected. So if everyone agrees on that baseline, that data, and we can use that data with the cross of new technology, AI, and everything in that area that's moving really fast, we can build a tool that can help us analyze land use change and the impact that that's going to have in the lake. And with that, we can set standards, we can, influence the business models of these companies, and, inform decision making and a cultural transformation. So I think that's key for addressing these issues in an effective and not aggressive way.
Yeah, no, and I think folks were chuckling a little bit about the data point because, we live in an era where data can be challenged, and I think one of the things we wanted to discuss tonight was just sort of, how do you build these environmental organizations and movements, but organizations, to last through political cycles. I mean, we are, 1 year plus into the Trump administration here in the United States. Chile is going to have a new conservative government next week. I think that's, the broader political question is on everybody's mind. Maybe you could speak to this a little bit, Jesse. How is it to work with what I presume would be, maybe a more antagonistic federal government?
Thanks for that super easy question. Political grandstanding about to happen. No, I'm a scientist, so I'm biased. But, data is very helpful for assessing where we're at and trying to get consensus on it. Unfortunately, we live in a world about who got the data, who paid for the data, who owns the data. Is it real data? Something I've seen, which is really unique in Chile, is the data is funded by the second largest aqua farming company in the world. Aqua Chile funds the science. But the agreement that Nano set up with them is that we'll be in charge of communicating what we find. You're paying for it, but we're going to be in charge of communicating it. So I think that matters. And where the data comes from and who validates it, that's something that it took us many decades in the States to realize where it comes from matters. And so they've kind of addressed that in the beginning. Another thing that's different is in Tahoe, we basically took science and understanding through grassroots kind of crazy folks out in kayaks and doing some silly stuff to get the data, and then use some advocates to push it forward, and then created regulation and policy. And we never really brought along anyone with us, if you will. Developers, the locals, anyone else. And so most of what we've done in Tahoe is trying to convince people that that data is legitimate, that it's for good intentions, that it can benefit us all, and that's been a struggle. Chile has done it a little bit differently. They started with the science. They had different folks fund it. They learned some stuff through that. We have very technically advanced data. It's publicly available immediately through satellites, through social media. It's all accessible. That's great. And then rather than build regulation immediately from the data, they actually went directly into cultural transformation, which we call community engagement. But essentially, let me explain to you what this all means. Let me bring in people and talk about this so you all understand it. And then together, let's create public policy. Let's create rules and regulations of development together under a common understanding. And that's different than Tahoe. We kind of went in a slightly different order. And I think if I could do it again, we're doing it again, I would do that differently and bring more people in, bring technology in, bring understanding in at the beginning, and then create policy together. It's much easier to follow a rule if you're like, oh yeah, of course I'll do that. Versus like, tell me why it matters. And I know I didn't answer your question, but
artful dodge.
Yeah, artful dodge. I stayed off the politics. But
no, how do you see your work changing with the new government beginning next week?
Yes, I think, and luckily, I think we've had an environmental policy and regulation that's been developed in the last 25 years. And the last governments have been left wing, right wing, left wing, right wing, left wing, and now right wing. So there's been a back and forth. But the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Energy, they've had kind of policies that have been maintained in time. That's a great thing because that's fundamental for establishing work in the long term. I think it's very important as a nonprofit to maintain your independence and be technically backed up but independent. So we are 100% privately funded. We have an independent board of directors that give us our strategy guidelines, and we don't have any government funding from the government. Okay, so we work with the government. We get their endorsement on different projects. We have an MOU with the Ministry of Environment, but we let me put it this way, we don't need them. We want to move and need to move faster than the speed of the government. So now I'm very looking forward to see how this government's going to act in these topics. One of its priorities is economic development. So they're going to address some issues with permits and regulation. And there's been, publicly spoken that they're going to address permits. So let's wait and see if there's some, through these permits, they overthrow or they, trespass the limits of, environmental policies and regulations associated with the environment. We're going to have to act as a nonprofit that raises our voice and be a firm opposition, and we will.
Yeah, and Jesse, you were speaking earlier a bit about the speed of government and the speed of getting things done in California, and how your organization fundamentally was rooted in the idea of stop development. But we're getting to the point here in California where you see some development as beneficial for the lake and for the lake region, but we have policy here in the state standing in the way to some degree. Talk a little bit about that and the idea of speed and what you think needs to be done to benefit the region.
Yeah. Again, a very easy question. Yes, no, true, false. It's regulation. Originally, environmental protection was created to stop bad things. A great way to approach that being a reality was through litigation, which is very effective at stopping things. Not super effective at moving things forward. So here we are today, and litigation still has a place to stop bad things, but it's often not the best tool to progress things. And based on Tahoe's situation, a lot of our job now is to undo mistakes of the past. We developed too close to the lake. We didn't put a lot of thought into kind of cumulative impact. So this project, no problem. This project, no problem. 72 of these projects, probably a problem. So how do we do that? So now we need to kind of back it off. So the idea, though, is that development now can undo those challenges. And honestly, projects are coming in with good ideas at the beginning. They're engaging groups like ours. They're looking at ways to innovate. They're bringing in technology and new ideas outside of your traditional, sort of environmental versus development dynamic. And those discussions bring us to an improved starting point. Technology allows us to study that, to share that better, to create understanding, and then develop projects. Are we there? By no means. I think we're dealing with a little bit of developmental trauma in the past, and we're still working through that. But there are places like Chile that perhaps don't have that and are more open to these ideas. And actually, not only myself, I've been trying to bring people from Tahoe, developers in Tahoe, and other innovators on both sides of the countries together to talk about these things. What are creative, dynamic ways to raise funds, to develop projects, to kind of put something on the ground that people can believe in. And a little bit of this is a pilot example, right? So conceptually, we can talk about this all day, but I'm a person that needs to see it to believe it. I want to see it and test it and taste it and admit defeat where it may be there, or admit success. So we're working on pilot projects that are scalable with data. We're going to do the project, we're going to learn from it, and we're going to talk about what worked and didn't work. That allows us to scale it. We're doing that in Tahoe. Sometimes we have some pushback. In Chile, what I've seen is in the 5 to 7 years they've been operating, they've done this much faster. And that might be cultural, dynamic, or whatever, but we can learn from that and say, hey, look, this can actually work if we do this. And that's pretty exciting to see. Outside of politics, sorry, I'm still avoiding politics. I know you're aiming at it, but would it be good?
No, of course. I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier that I thought was interesting. It's just this idea of corporate partnerships and maybe I just think it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about what you're telling me, some of the cultural distinctions between the two countries. Here, environmental movements are certainly concerned about partnering with corporations and with the idea of greenwashing, but Nano, you found it very necessary in order to do some of the work that you're doing. Could you talk to us a little bit about who you're partnering with in Chile, what exactly they're allowing you to do, and how you navigate that.
Yeah, I can talk about 3 projects that we're working with the private sector. Like Jesse said, we're working with the second largest aquaculture farming company in the world to fund our science program in Lake Yanquihue. Why did we do that? They used to have salmon cages for doing the freshwater part of the reproduction in the lake. But because of a merger that they had, they took the cages out of the lake, and they came up with this title in the newspaper saying, hey, we're not going to give back the concessions, but we want to destine them for scientific and research purposes. So I grabbed the phone, found out who was the CEO of this company. Chile is a small country, so it's easy to find out these things and address them. Found out who was his PA, and we were having a meeting 2 days later about this. And he goes, oh, it's interesting your work, make a proposal. So we went back to UC Davis and said, we've got the opportunity here to raise important amount of money and do something with top technology to monitor and understand this lake that hasn't been done before. Things moved forward, they put the money, we brought in a Chilean technological company, we have very good technological capacities in Chile, and we developed this project. But we put a very strict guidelines and borders between our collaboration. Our MOU was very clear in that the use of the data could be analyzed only by us and UC Davis. The communications of the results had to be validated by us, and this partnership was about that. It was a technical analysis of the lake to be able to inform decision making. And on the other side, it's why do we partner with the private sector? They have the money and they have the capacity to influence. I want to get into the business models and in this decision making, investment decisions of these big, companies in order to, again, put the lake in the center of decision making. So you need to be in the playfield instead of in the audience. Another partner is Nestle, the big food production company. We partnered with them for doing this inclusive access ramp in one of the beaches. A beautiful project that the municipality of Frutillar has for people with disabilities and the elderly in order for them to be able to enjoy the lake. So they have this flotating wheelchairs where people can, go in them and enjoy the lake and swim. So they were interested in funding this because they have this. They have lots of ice cream brands and they have these programs in the beach in the summer. And they were, the CEO was crying when we cut the tape because it was a beautiful project of development of a ramp, construction of a ramp. And we realized that this can be replicated in many other beaches of lakes in the south of Chile. So it has a big replicatory angle. And the other aspect of that project is that Nestle is one of the biggest producers of milk and dairy products in Chile. So they work with many dairy farms. And dairy farms are one of the sources of nutrients that are going into the lakes. So through them, we can also influence in the dairy farms through their value chain in order to change their culture, provide new standards, and make things more sustainable. And
have some of these businesses done that? Have they made tangible changes that have made an impact on these lakes because of some of the partnerships that you've done?
Yeah, Nestle has a very good project with their farmers. It's a project that's guidelines coming from Switzerland of nutrient efficient application. So farmers you need to apply nutrients to your grass fields and your crops in order to grow them and have food for your cows, but let's do it through efficient, standards. So they work through the economic angle. Don't just do it, what you think, but let's really do the analysis and let's see how much of these nutrients you need for growing these crops. And a project that we're trying to develop is for developing green infrastructure, like natural borders from this, prairies and praderas that are adjacent to the lake. So that's what happens. They have these prairies, they fertilize them, it rains, and everything goes into the lake. You get the algae and big problem. So let's put natural barriers today, bushes and artificial wetlands, in order to capture that runoff and avoid it going to the lake.
And Jesse, does this approach sound completely alien to you? I mean, what from your perspective, what would it be like to kind of invite a large multinational corporation into a project you wanted to get accomplished in Lake Tahoe?
Great question. Been here almost 14 years working in Lake Tahoe. If you asked me 14 years ago, I'd be like, totally alien. We're not doing that. That's a problem. Ask me today, and I'm like, this is probably our best path forward in a lot of ways. So a couple examples of that. I don't know if you're familiar with Palisades, formerly SQUA, which is Altera, Icon Pass. We challenged legally a project development about 12 years ago. We felt it was bad for the lake and we wanted to stop it. That was our approach. Fast forward, I'm skipping a lot of stuff here, so maybe there's some Q&A here. But most recently we went into negotiations with Altera and were able to reduce the project something more appropriate for Lake Tahoe. 40% reduction in the amount of luxury condos, significant reduction in commercial, permanently preserving places like Shirley Canyon and other places we thought were valuable. And those discussions have been wonderful recently. And we sort of saw this benefit of being able to share that story, do something that's economically viable, necessary. I mean, there needed to be improvements at that resort. What were they? How do we do them? That's one example. Another one would be Vail Resorts, Epic Pass. We didn't really talk to them 14 years ago. Now we're partnering on community outreach and education about how you can be a better steward when you come to that resort, how you can benefit from other things like a park once, car-free, carefree kind of mentality. Park your car once, you can get around without it. They're going to be working with us to wrap a gondola, to talk about education information throughout about getting people out of their cars and experiencing it. They can reach so many people that we could never reach. And it's about making the right choice for Lake Tahoe or Chile or whatever, the easy choice or only choice, the way you just do it when you go there. And these partnerships are not something historically we were comfortable doing. And now, honestly, partially in what we're seeing here is there is a benefit. You have to have guidelines, you have to have structure, you have to have some control over it, and we're still dipping our toes in. But this is the future, I think, of environmental protection, is uncommon partners coming together to talk about a solution with the different levers we all have. And that's something that I think by partnering with Chile, we've been able to see happen in real time and have some confidence about it as we come back here and work on that.
And so that's been something that's influenced you. The Chilean experience has opened your mind to these sorts of things.
100%. Again, this is like do it again, do it better. I think if we probably would have had this conversations with, formerly SQUA, now Palisades back in 1960 around the Olympics, might be a little different view of the lake today. And so there's some ways to do it. Of course, technology, communication's different, perspectives are different, so a lot of factors. But yes, absolutely inspired by what we have seen in Chile.
And I think you mentioned Q&A, and I just want to suddenly confess that I don't have.
Like from your perspective, but when Doug Tompkins bought all that land and preserved it in Chile, heard that was controversial because of different interests. And so I'm wondering, outside interests, foreign interests, U.S. interests, are people more or less aligned in that area in terms of it being like a positive thing that he did, or is it still fairly divisive?
Yeah, indeed it was controversial back in the day because they didn't know what his interests were. Environmentalism and conservation wasn't something that we talked about. So this guy from the US, with a lot of money was coming down and buying a lot of land in both Chile and Argentina. So there were like issues with sovereignty and, people were really afraid of what he was doing. They said stupid things that he was putting together like this Jewish nation and, crazy stuff. But he knew what he was doing, and he was implementing, again, a rewilding, kind of deep conservation model, okay? Because him and Chris and some other partners thought that this land, these areas were very sensitive, and they were very important to be conserved and preserved ad eternum, okay? And they came and they said, we're gonna buy them, we're gonna develop national parks, and then we're gonna give them to the state. And no one believed that. And eventually it did happen. It was 3-4 years ago, they gave them back to the state and became public land. And they said, government, it's yours now. We said it, we preserved it, we rewilded it. Now you have to, maintain and implement the national parks and get it going. So I think now it is very well viewed and validated, and back in the day it wasn't. And it's an example for us, for everyone, again, our model is a little different because we want to balance conservation and development. And we're working in a different area that has a different social and economic dynamic than the one they had back there. He had conflicts also with ranchers and farmers, that were ranching sheep and had fences. And he was like, no, we need to rewild this. Take the fences out, take your cows and sheep out. We want back the mountain lions and the llamas but deep rewilding, which was culturally difficult to understand. But nowadays, I think there's a very positive view of him, of Chris, and of the network of people that they brought to work in Chile.
Yeah.
Further questions?
Yes.
We're working our way up.
Hi, my name is Jerry Schultz. To avoid rambling, I'm going to something. I'm one of those crazy kayakers, Jesse.
Nice to meet you.
I returned from Chile last week. I spent a month there. I was on a 3-week kayaking expedition in Cholas Archipelago with Knowles, otherwise known as the National Outdoor Leadership School. Without going into the weeds too much, they've operated their campus on Coyhaique for about 40 years. It was an experimental trip for them. We put in at Puerto Aguirre, traveling to the western edge to Isla Kent, and then exiting short of Puerto Cisnes, unexpectedly exiting a place called Gaviota, a small fishing village, on Isla Magdalena. During the day, we're paddling around for these huge glacier-carved channels that look completely wild, but what you often hear is the low hum of these salmon farms, those salmoneras. About 80% of our eventual campsites over that 3-week period had a salmonera nearby. Large piles of trash on these beaches, rocky increments. I know this is not a lake, it's an archipelago.
Mm-hmm.
But like at night, you close your eyes and the ecosystem just comes alive. Sea lions and birds, just in really incredible soundscapes. And as beautiful as the place is, the best way to experience that environment is to really close your eyes. So for me, like experiences like the one I just had turn visitors to be very attentive witnesses. I'm not speaking on behalf of Knowles, but I am a long-time supporter of that organization. I know that Knowles is interested in developing this particular expedition further. They're one of the few operators in the area because of their relationship with the Chilean Armada. And I guess it struck me that there might be real value, speaking to Jesse's comment about uncommon partners, about potentially partnering with outdoor education organizations like Knowles, with its long history with organizations like Leave No Trace, to hopefully leverage the work around conservation you're doing in Chile.
Is that something you've done, working with such groups?
Yeah, we've actually worked very closely with Leave No Trace, and I mean, just to put a pin in what you're saying is the best way to engage in protecting a place is to have a personal, passionate connection to the place. You don't get that without going there. And I'm assuming you've all been to Tahoe at least, and you're probably going to Chile right after this to go. Yeah, and then after his comment, but really that's what it is. And we want to turn that passion into progress, right? So the idea is you connect with a place, and there's a way to do it. And organizations like Chile Lagos Limpios, Keep Tahoe Blue are trying to provide that. But you got to start with the connection.
Sure.
And the partners can help with that if you can't all get to Chile, right? There's partners that can help. So
I guess
yes.
specifically, I wanted to talk to Fernando a little bit about the life kinship, a lot on the future of it, and how this may be a mechanism for indigenous communities sort of taking a bit more of an active role in preserving their own environments.
Yeah, maybe tell us what that all is. Oh, no, all right.
Thank you for the question.
Great question, and you painted a beautiful picture.
That's a great and difficult question, and it's a topic that's being discussed as we speak. And there's conflicts with the salmon industry. It's an industry that exports $6 billion. It's our second largest economic exports, and they are located in some places that are very pristine. So there's the big discussion on what's the relevant scale, where are the places where they should be installed and where they should not be installed. There is the new biodiversity service, which is an area of the Ministry of Environment that's overlooking different areas of the country that need to be preserved because of their high ecosystemic value. So there is a clash between private interests there and protected interests. So I think there's two ways of addressing that. I mean, we need to see the data and see the real data on what are the impacts of salmon farming industry in these estuaries and in these pristine places. Is there space for them? What's the scale? I believe that there is, but I believe that we need planning and really have a good understanding on what's the landscape, where can they be located and where can't they be located, okay? And those discussions need to be had with a very relevant technical validation, with a proper and solid discussion, properly moderated, and to understand the different views, because nowadays it's not working. I think it's a true conflict, and that Ley Las Quinche is it's still in very early stages of I think being thoughtful and everyone agreeing with it. I think.
Fascinating. Yeah, there's some real conflicts there.
Yeah, and I mean, sorry, we work with the salmon farming company and the sector, but that doesn't mean that we say that they're perfect. There are multiple environmental issues. The companies that have cages still in the lakes, they need to retire. That's not sustainable. And there are still some that have not retired because they say, if I'm not get thrown out, I have my permits and I will keep on doing it. And that's bad, and they're contaminating the lake bed. There is all this waste with plastic and nets, but it's an amazing source of employment for people in the south. There's lots of people that live from this industry that have been able to progress because of this industry and the work they have there. So it's finding middle ground between the existence of this industry, but having the environment in the center of their decisions in the long term.
Absolutely. I know we had one question up here in the front.
Then in the back,
And there's
yes.
one in the back, I see,
Yes.
and over there as well. So.
Maybe just paint a picture for us of what would happen, or what would these places look like if your organizations didn't exist and hadn't existed? Would it be skyscrapers and algae? I'm thinking a bit about Clear Lake in California.
Appropriately named.
I would love to kind of just hear. It sounds like your organizations have an incredibly important role to play, and without advocates, things would really fall apart. Is that the case? Or talk a bit about that.
I mean, the history in Tahoe would indicate, yeah. Our organization was kind of coalesced around a proposal around the Olympics to develop Lake Tahoe. A 4-lane freeway around the lake, a bridge over Emerald Bay, 6 to 8 casino districts like State Line, and a full-time population the size of San Francisco. That. Or what we got now, which is about 50,000 full-time residents, small communities, a smaller highway, much more better managed sewage management, stormwater management, et cetera, as we learned about the ecosystem there and what the impacts could be. And that was through science, honestly, back to understanding. By the time people see a problem, it's really hard to dial it back. Science is really good at identifying an issue before we can see it through data, if you believe in that. And we're working on that still, apparently. But the idea is that's what science is good at, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. And we did at Tahoe in a certain order I discussed earlier. Nana's working that through very advanced, honestly, technology and monitoring to try and paint that picture sooner. Because I think, at least in my experience, everyone that's been to Lake Tahoe agrees that Keep Tahoe Blue is like the thing to do there. The question is do we need to do anything? Looks pretty good to me. But we can't wait till we see the problem. And that's kind of, I think, the lesson we've learned at Tahoe that we're trying to accelerate there. So back to your original question, Tahoe, it'd be green, to be blunt. And you don't get that back. And I can go into all the science nerd terms here, but everything's going oligotrophic to eutrophic, so clear to green. We're making it go faster. And so we can either be part of that or we can not be part of that.
Some more hands. On this side of the room.
There's one, and there's one in the.
Yeah,
You've been very patient in the back too. Yeah. She's been very patient.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had a question about El Lago Yanquihue. Did you say that the salmoneras were moved out of the Lago Yanquihue and you have a partnership with a company that is getting data from what was left behind, or did I get that whole thing wrong?
Yeah, Lake Yanquihue, I can guess you're Chilena, or?
My parents are from Chile. I am from New York City, and I own Chile Lindo, which is the Chilean deli down the street.
We'll see you tomorrow.
So I've been following Tahoe Blue for quite a while because I tap into everything that has to do between California and Chile to basically create cultural bridges between these two worlds. And I know there's a lot of work coming out of UC Davis. A lot of Chilean students study in UC Davis. Because of the similarities, agriculture and all these other areas. Wonderful work you're doing. But when I was in Chile, in the Lago Yanquihue, I heard that the construction, some of the sewage was going into the lake, which I thought was horrific. And that the natural habitat, the fish that used to be there were gone, since they had put salmoneras there. And I don't know if they removed them finally, but I thought that was terrible. So I know it's a huge conflict between the salmoneras that create so much employment and then the devastation that it does to the environment.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'm going to try to address both issues, the aquaculture and the sewage. So yeah, aquaculture farming has the freshwater part where they grow the little fish till they're like this, and then they move them to the ocean water, the salty water. And the freshwater part, companies do it either in land with like recirculation cages getting out from a well or from a river, or in the lakes. And that's some law that was permitted way back, okay? And that's not sustainable. And most of the companies have taken their cages out of the lakes because of social opposition, because of it's old technology, but it's cheaper because you just have the fish there, and then there are many environmental conflicts associated with them. The fish escape, their poop goes into the lake bed. But there are still some companies that have not left. They have their permits from way back, and this is a cheaper way of doing it. And they've said it to my face, I'm not going to leave unless I'm going to be, thrown out. Okay. That's their culture.
Start a campaign against it.
So, and there are big opposition, and there are environmental organizations, there are municipalities that want to kick them out, okay? But this company, Agua Chile, they used to have cages in the lakes. They were acquired by AgroSuper, which is another big kind of protein production company, and they had as a policy to have their cages outside, okay? So they, did a write-off in their assets, and they removed them, and they said, like I said, they went out in the newspaper, in the business part of the newspaper, saying that we want to destine this concessions that they had for research purposes. And that's when we approached them. And our project are not using necessarily their concessions, but we put together this scientific and monitoring program where we have buoys installed in different parts of the lake, sensors in the shore, and we're getting data of temperature and oxygen from the top to the bottom. And with that, we were able to create this lake model with the help of UC Davis. UC Davis has a very robust science, and we have a lake model, a hydrodynamic model of Lake Yanquihue. So we know today how water moves. We know how oxygen mixes, and we're on the way of building a tool for understanding what's the impact of land use change, land use activities, dairy, the hotel, whatever. What's the impact that it's going to have in the lake today, tomorrow, and in 20 years? So that's the situation. And the sewage situation, just to close, there is an issue. We have, very good technology for treating sewage and for providing potable water. But we don't have good stormwater infrastructure in the cities where it rains a lot. We have 2,000, 2,500 millimeters a year. So when it rains a lot and we don't have this stormwater infrastructure, water goes into the sewage, okay? Some people even in their houses have connected their rainwater, pipes direct to sewage. And that makes the system collapse. So there's a law, again, an old law, that allows this company, when there are like heavy rain events, which is not defined what's a heavy rain event, to open the pipes because their system are collapsing. Okay, so they're needed, there's no way around it. So that's when you see the brown, disgusting plume that it's dramatic.
Yeah, I'm sure it looks awful. Well, to bring us to a close, I just wanted to ask, a final thought. Everybody here obviously cares about protecting these lakes. So, what can people do? Just let people know briefly how they can get involved. What and what can people do to help protect these lakes in this era?
We're out of time, so I have to answer that. Basically, we're going to put contact information up here. Reach out. You got ideas, you got stories. One thing I've learned in working in environmental field for nearly 30 years, from science to policy to everything else, is the best ideas come from the folks you're not looking for them to come from. So if you're passionate about a place and you got an idea, reach out. That's my number one takeaway from this. Again, to reiterate, we went to Chile to share what we had learned. I've learned as much or more from them experiencing it. So that's my takeaway. Get involved. And nobody's going to fix this for us, to be fair. Maybe now more than ever, but don't count on somebody else to fix it for you. If you care about a place, there's a role for you. And that can be here, that can be in Chile, and probably go to Chile. Been a few times. It's pretty nice. So a couple takeaways on that. And Keep Tahoe Blue isn't, it's not Make Tahoe Blue, otherwise I'd be out of a job. It's Keep Tahoe Blue, which means I got decades here. I got kids, we got generations to do this for. So we need all of your help. Thanks for being here.
Nope. How can people get involved with your efforts in Chile?
Yes, well, first of all, come to Chile. You're all welcome to come and visit Chile, like my friend with the orange beanie kind of share. It's a beautiful, amazing country, very friendly with the foreigners, so come and see it. And second, these complex issues have multiple lines of work. You have to address them through communications, through science and technology, through infrastructure, through culture. So there's many ways in which you can get involved. And I'm particularly and especially very excited with what things that are happening here in the Bay Area, in Tahoe, and how we can collaborate, because I think this is just the start of the collaboration. I'm very excited with what's happening with technology here. The advances of technology are crazy. So this idea of building this tool, I'm getting very, very excited on how with current technology we can do something that hasn't been done for other water cities and other watersheds in the world. And we can build it in Chile, in California, and later on export it to other watersheds in the world.
That's cool.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. And we'll be around for a little bit. But thanks for participating.